So right at the early stage, prawns used to come up under the lights when we were getting pilchards for bait, and it'd be only one every now and again, so it was a really sort of odd sort of a thing in Boston Bay. So yeah, people took a little bit of note of that. But while the tuna fishing was really going well, no one was really interested in any other fisheries. And a fellow, the government had done a bit of a survey with the survey boat called the Wirrata, and the conclusion of that there was no prospect of a prawn fishery in South Australia, so that was sort of the end of that. But Gavin Scott, who came over initially to work on the Tacoma, and he must have been only there for a short time on the Tacoma, and he was sort of an eccentric Englishman, and he smoked a pipe and drove an MG, and he had a lovely little wife, and everyone sort of considered Gavin a bit of an eccentric. And anyway, initially he had a boat called the Margarita, which was originally Bert Wilson's, I think, here, and she would have been maybe 40 feet or something like that. And I think he was a bit of craying and sharking with her. And then he bought the Mamina, and that was Gibson's boat, and she was just a typical Eden type Danish seiner. And anyway, Gavin was a bit interested in the prawns, so I don't know how it came to be, but Gunnar Jensen, he was put on the Margarita to do a survey, and the government was going to finance or pay him to do it, and he just had a small tri-net, and these tri-nets were only a couple of metres wide, little tiny boards. So he did St Vincent's Gulf, maybe part of the lower Spencer Gulf, and then up Venus Bay. And being a shark fisherman before, he probably had a little bit of an idea where, let's say off Venus, might have had prawns in the sharks' bellies there. But with these tri-nets, you only catch a few prawns. So we had a tri-net on our wooden 55-foot prawn trawler, and the idea of these tri-nets, you drop them down, and every 10 minutes you pull them up, and you've got your big gear on the bottom, and you count the number of prawns. So you might get 5 prawns, 10 prawns, 30 prawns. So if you get those sort of numbers, you're into fish. So the sort of survey you would have done would have been hard to calculate. You would have caught a few prawns, but hard to calculate what. So that nothing really came of that. But then later on, Gavin thought he'd have a go with the Mamina, so he fitted it out with conventional East Coast otterboard, single rig prawn gear. He borrowed netting off the Tacoma, old salmon netting, to make the trawls. And he might have even got some off Puglisi's. And he wanted some crew to go with him, so my brother Clyde and myself, we volunteered, and we went out south of the Sir Joseph Banks Group, and Gavin's idea that the prawns were in 27 fathoms. Maybe that's what they are on the East Coast, and it was in the winter time, which is the worst time to be catching prawns because the water's colder and they're not that active. And I can't remember, we spent 2 or 3 nights trawling, but without any really good protection on the cod ends. Had like rip-ups and and also shifting from one place to the other, looking for better catches. But I think the last shot we had, sort of heading up towards Dangerous Reef, and we had quite a nice showing, which would have been, in today's catch rates, would have been a good catch rate. Anyway, after that, Gavin gave it away because people's finances weren't good, and he'd run out of gear. So there was a lapse of, I'm not quite sure the year, but it would probably been 1963 maybe when Gavin had the go, and so in about 1967, the tuna fishing really started to collapse, and so fishermen started to do other things in the off season. The crews went ashore, and Tacoma was salmon fishing, and some of our crew had gone ashore. My cousin Robin and Jack Bellamy, they'd gone ashore, and we had a little go for prawns in the Boston Bay, towing a 13-foot beam trawl. We borrowed the net from the Puglisi's, and we towed it behind Tacoma's salmon boat, and we caught some prawns, and so the next year, or later on that year, we asked our dad and my uncles whether we could have a go with the Tacoma, because at that stage, if we could just make wages, was going to be okay, because a lot of the tuna fishermen had left the port, like Bert Wilson, who was a prominent fisherman in Port Lincoln. He'd packed up and gone up to the Gulf of Carpentaria. Other fishermen like the Gibsons, they were catching Tommy roughs over on the beaches just to put food on the table. So things were really bad, and the Haldanes, their finances weren't good either, and so my brother and myself, we volunteered to buy the gear, and so we bought enough gear to put a double rig beam trawl rig on the Tacoma, and we got the designs from the FAO gear book. So it was two 26-foot beam trawls. We thought they would be the best things to start off with, because we didn't understand how to work otter boards. And the big old winch that Tacoma had, the purse-eining winch, that had been ashore. So my Uncle Alan sort of refurbished that. We put it back on the Tacoma, and we went out in the same area where Gavin had a go, and it was in the winter time as well, maybe July or even August. And we had the same problems, rip-ups. We didn't have any protection on the cod ends. And we didn't concentrate. Where we did find some prawns, we didn't sort of concentrate. And we were the first boat to actually fish north of the Sir Joseph Banks group. The country we struck up there was sort of was corally, and we were just within maybe 5 or 6 nautical miles of where the prawns were eventually found in quantity. Anyway, after that exercise, we came into the port, and I can't remember what we caught, but it was a few £100 of prawns. It was a nice little showing, and we had all this ripped up gear on deck, and the beam trawls, which are pretty foreign to most people, and the local fishermen came down, and they were all gawking down, watching us unload these prawns, and so the curiosity of the fishermen to see prawns in some sort of quantity was sort of a trigger. And Roger Howlett, he had a a 52-foot boat called the Cape Barren, and so he came down on deck with a crewman who had been a prawn fisherman in New South Wales, and this fella said, if you can catch prawns with that gear, there's got to be prawns there. So it was getting towards the tuna season, so Tacoma went back tuna fishing, and Roger Howlett, he fitted his little boat out with a single rig, and he went out on the same sort of area where we were fishing. It was probably getting into a better time, but he didn't catch anything significant. We were out tuna fishing, and the tuna fishing was really poor. Like the boats weren't finding anything, and weather was bad. And anyway, Roger Howlett had a call from his pub friends up the Gulf that they were catching snapper up there with prawns in their stomach. So he went up off Cowell, and the first night up there he caught 800 pound. And when we heard this, when we were out tuna fishing, immediately just turned around and came into port and started to fit out ourselves. So where Roger found these prawns became known as the Golden Mile, and so it wasn't long before there was a few other boats. There was one of the Caligas, like the two the Sims brothers. They fitted out, and yeah. So eventually there was about 7 boats working in those first few months, and they had 2 flags. One up, like a trawl shot's about 3 nautical miles. Like an hour's trawling. So we used to put a light at one end, and well, the lights were permanent, or just a light with a battery on it. And so each night they go out there, find the flags, put the batteries on it, and the boats just to trawl up and down between these 2 lights. And yeah, it wasn't anything to catch, a couple of £1,000 a night average. And yeah, we still had the beam trawls. And one night with the beam trawls, we caught 4,500 pounds with the beam trawls.
That's a couple of tonne.
Yeah. But because of the beam trawls, we didn't know how to work out the lead lines, and we were getting a lot of rubbish. And so we decided to switch over to otter gear. And but the beam trawls, I think eventually they'll come back into their own, because they need a lot less power to pull them, and you can do more modification to putting in exclusion sections and things. So yeah. Anyway, that's sort of and I think myself, if we hadn't have done that. I acknowledge that Roger Howlett, he'd made the first commercial catches, but we actually lit the spark that made the thing go, and that could have stayed sleeping there up until this date, because people thought that Queensland was the place for prawns, and they never thought that they'd be caught in such quantities in southern Australia. And with the current sort of environmental restrictions, if that prawn fishery had been delayed for 10, 15 more years, it would be probably fairly hard to actually do it in the face of the sort of opposition you would get. So anyway, that's the sort of the story that. And I just think that my brother and myself played a key role in that initial start to the fishery, and because we were only young fellows, we never got any recognition for it, and it split like half the tuna fleet, like half the tuna boats went prawning, so it saved those, like the tuna blokes, from bankruptcy virtually, and then it created this other sector. I think there's 2,000 tonne of prawns caught there now. yeah, a lot of these fishermen that did well, like the tuna guys and that, there's another story out there that, in some ways they were saved by the sort of actions that we did. Well, as soon as it looked like that this prawn fishery would be a goer, my brother and myself went up to New South Wales, up to Ballina, and laid the keel for a 55-foot wooden prawn trawler. And it was the first trawler specifically built for that fishery. Yeah, and
The boobook.
boobook, yeah. And so it was a couple of years before we worked on the Tacoma prawning, and then when our boat was finished, we sailed it round to South Australia. It was August coming round, so we were virtually in the middle of winter, and anyway we had some engine trouble off Beachport, and we came into Beachport and we were anchored there. Anyway, there was quite a bit of argy-bargy with fishermen trying to get prawn licences, and of course a lot of the Cray blokes were too. And they had the minister was down in Beachport on the day we were there, and there was a fishermen's meeting, and they were pointing out to this boat out in the bay, there's a New South Wales boat that's got a licence. Like we were granted a licence, and anyway, on the strength of that, our licence was taken off us and reissued to a zone west of Cape Radstock, which is that's going towards Cape Radstock to the Western Australian border. And so it was like getting sent to Siberia. So here we are with our new boat, and so we headed up there, and there was no proven sort of areas for prawning there. And anyway, we were able to sort of find a little patch up near the North Archipelago, and the only reason we survived is that we were catching rare shells. And we were catching these adcock evolutes, and they were worth about $200 each, and we're selling them to Americans. There's only been 12 ever found in the world before, and at one shot we had 27. And so anyway, we survived up there, and eventually were able to get back into zones where we could make a reasonable living. So the zoning was put in so that it sort of forced boats to go out and look in areas and try and discover the extent of the prawn fishery. There were zones even down off the Murray Mouth and various areas, but it ended up that there was only really Spencer Gulf. St Vincent Gulf had a fishery there, but fairly limited, and then Venus Bay initially seemed to be quite a good little fishery there, but it's pretty much subject to ocean currents and so the sort of good years. So there was about a dozen boats working out of there initially, having really good catches, but now I think there's only 2 boats licensed for that west coast. My father, after experience with the tuna fishery, he was one of the main persons that lobbied to get some sort of better management into the system. And of course, when the prawn fishery kicked off, Mick Olsen was a friend of my father's, and so that initially it was probably one of the few fisheries that has had management put in it right at the very start. So even when those 7 boats went in, we were issued with logbooks, so that every shot you did, you had to put down the log, your catch, your position, and so they started to get all this really good information. And between my dad and Mick Puglisi, that they were probably the most prominent two that got this sort of management in, and the sort of things that my dad used to say is like we used to work out, right through the year, and my dad used to say that it's like mowing your lawn every day, and he had the theory that if you're a farmer, you have your harvester in the shed, and when they're ready to harvest, you go out and harvest them, and that's what it's sort of come to now, is that they have various closed seasons, and when the prawns are harvestable, they go out and harvest them, and then you put your boat back in the shed. So we also had a visit from a Canadian fellow, Professor Copes, and the Canadians were really probably a bit ahead of the thinking in Australia as far as fisheries management, and so that was quite a good sort of input into people's thinking, so that prawn fishery in South Australia, it's probably one of the best managed fisheries anywhere, because the actual Gulf itself, there's very little alteration in the actual water mass, like some other fisheries affected by ocean currents, but I think the circulation in the Gulf takes about 20 years or something for it to change. So it's it's like having a paddock.
Yeah. So can you give an indication, like you used to work a lot more days, but now you work 50 days for 50 tonne or something?
Yeah. So so over the moon period, like the prawns are like nocturnal, so any form of light, and they don't sort of come out of the mud or the sand. So in the early days, we used to fish over the moon periods, even though we weren't catching much, and and because it was a common resource, you had to be out there because the other bloke was catching them. And anyway, that was one of the things they brought in. They had like a 10-day sort of tie-up period over the moon, so that saved a lot in fuel, and the prawns were still there when you got back. Size-wise, now they have the closures. Of course, the winter time is the time when the prawns are less active, so there's a closure period then, and they also looked at the size, because like small prawns are worth a lot less per kilo. So if you let those prawns grow out, you can treble or even more the value of them. So when they start each season or each sort of fishing period, they send boats up to survey the areas, and they take a size of the prawns and the catch. So when the boats finally go up there, they know the areas where they're going to get the most benefit, and when the catches do drop off, then they actually pull out. So it's really well managed. Well, one of the big issues facing them now is the cost of fuel. The gear we're regulated. That's what we've got to use. But the department needs to change its strategy to find gear that's easier to. I think the beam. Look, when we had the beam trials on Tacoma with the old 240 horsepower Atlas, it was only idling towing these beam trawls, because you're not using the otter boards to force the open up the trawl, and also when you get weed in the net with otter boards, the net sort of folds up, but with the beam trawls it doesn't. So I can see, as fuel, I forget what it was costing them per trip, but like because it's full bore, like, you're using a lot of horsepower and chewing up fuel. I don't know, someone quoted 5,000 a trip or something. No, 12,000 a trip. So if you can cut that back, like the industry when we first started was really profitable. But now it's becoming more marginal, so if they can cut out some of those major costs like fuel, and like these exclusion, I think they have got these exclusion things on the nets now where like a big stingray comes in, he gets shunted out, but with the otter trawls, it's not as easy as like if you've got a fixed thing like a beam trawl. You can set up these better exclusion things that can sort out the rubbish and so
while you were prawning, did you have any bad frights or in any way? Any accidents? Any drama?
Had some funny dramas. One night we hooked up another bloke and went across his trawl, like two trawls together, and of course trying to sort that out with a bit of roll on, and another time we had I got the cod in round the propeller, and my elder brother Clyde diving over the side with a knife trying to cut this off.
In the dark?
In the middle of the night, the gulfs, we thought that'd be like fishing in a lake, but actually you can get quite a steep, short build up of waves, like you get quite a lot of tide, so you get the wind against the tide. So it's not sometimes we've been trawling, especially when we had less horsepower, the wires be going slack, we're hitting the waves, and the chucking the sea right over the wheelhouse. So what we thought was going to be a mill pond, it can get pretty nasty there in the right conditions.
What about stabilisers?
Before the stabilisers came in, Tacoma used to roll her booms under, but then when we put the stabilisers, these were just the chains hanging down with the like stingray shape
Paravanes.
Blades, and God, that just stopped it dead. Took that roll right off it. That they were, and. We tried some other sorts of rigs. We want to have one where we tow off a 3 nets and tow one off a gantry at the back stern. But we just had one stabiliser on one small boom, and that works. We tried a rig with a skid in the middle. And 2 nets with just a board either side, which sort of meant instead of having 4 boards, you only had 2 boards, and so you were taking the load directly, like the middle wire just took the, but it proved to be a little bit messy. A lot of these in New South Wales and these places, they have these things called triple rigs, but in South Australia not allowed to have those at this stage. But people have trawled up some funny stuff. One of the fishermen, they trawled up a fresh camel's head. It had come off a passing freighter, and also cars up off Whyalla. The locals used to take out cars and sink them for snapper patches, and yeah, yes, in the early days, like drawing up a car was quite common, and uh,
That'd cause a few problems, wouldn't it?
yeah. And another time we were trawling up these bags of peanuts. It must have been a ship cleaning out its hold and just chucking them over the side, and like some of them have had big white pointers even in the trawls. And there was the part of a reconnaissance plane that was in the Second World War that went missing. That was trawled up, and off Wallaroo, when the sailing ships used to come up there in ballast, they used to chuck the ballast over the side, so there were big granite rocks, and they would go down into the net, and then you'd lift the cod end up, and the weight would trap these rocks up in the neck, 20 feet in the air, and then you'd release the catch at the bottom, and these rocks would come down. And also there was a few old sailing ship anchors out there off Wallaroo on the trawling ground, and once people got them on their sort of GPSs, people in the early days are getting hooked up on those, and anyway, in one case, one of the trawler sent a diver down to unhook the net, and a big white pointer followed him up. Yeah. There was a few sinkings up there, there was a few boats caught alight, and I think that wasn't by accident. A few insurance jobs up there, but people wanting bigger boats, and we used to know when we were getting close to the Sims's old grounds, because we used to start trawling up the view balls. Yeah, they had names for all their spots, but they were experts at this. What they did there, they always wore bare feet and hats without the brim.
I remember seeing the old Mary Ann Sims there. The capping rail around the stern was all worn from the snapper line, pulling the snapper lines.
Yeah.
All grooved.
Yeah. I've got a photo of when they used to go tuna fishing occasionally under sail. He claims he was one of the few that have caught tuna under sail. But even when they were prawning, they'd be there for a few days, and then they'd be off doing their netting, and they didn't like sort of the monotony of.
No, I liked a bit of variety.
Yeah. The Mary Ann Sims, some blokes in Lincoln Border, I think. They're the same old story, like keeping these sort of boats.
Yes, old wooden boats.
Yeah,